I recently got a comment on my Chiraq box office and Negro dysfunction video telling me that I needed to check my sexism. I don't think there was anything sexist about what I said regarding black women in Chiraq. Now, when I look at Spike's premise for the movie, I look at that premise and I see where it was completely off base and in many cases extremely shallow. And the reason why I can say that is because he's talking about women going on a sex strike, and that's going to stop the violence in inner city communities. Now, I grew up in New York City during the 1980s, during the crack epidemic, and a lot of these guys out here, they were raised by single mothers who taught them a culture of violence and dysfunction before they became teenagers and adults back in the 1970s and the early 1980s. And this is what led to them becoming violent in the late 1980s and early 1990s. And this is why I can come to that conclusion because it was the black women who taught them that culture because they were the ones who grew up in the age of your feminism. They were the ones who grew up learning these feminist ideals and learning to be argumentative, combative, difficult. And this is the culture that they taught their children to be argumentative, combative, difficult, and hostile towards other people. And this is what led to the culture of violence, a culture that was pretty much reinforced by your, hyper masculine images in Madison Avenue and Hollywood media that showed you, your Schwarzeneggers and your Stallones holding Uzis and AK-47s. Um, but the culture that was taught in African American communities, for the most part, was one of violence here in New York City, and this is why people, lived to be violent, and that's why black people felt like, killing another black person had no value. A black person's life had no value back then, and this is the culture that is pretty much permeating through Chicago right now as part of the violence. And you know, I cannot absolve your African American Negro woman for her part in it, and I feel that Spike did everyone a disservice by absolving the African American Negro woman for her part in, creating this violent environment. Because if we look at the bigger picture with your Afro American Negro woman, she is the one who enables this violence. One, because her mother is a teacher of culture, and two, because the daughters enable this violence by taking the gifts from these Negro males who go out here and sell this dope and are part of these gangs, and the mothers also take these gifts and this money and they partake of the benefits of these Negro males going out here committing these crimes and destroying the quality of life in their neighborhood. Because this is exactly what I saw in New York City back in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Many of those black women were the ones dating the dope dealers, dating the gangbangers, um, letting him buy her these Gucci bags. They were the ones holding the Gucci bags that this dope dealer bought them. They were the ones wearing the $1,500 shearling coat and showing out. They were the ones wearing the Air Jordan tennis shoes. They were the ones smiling as they stepped out of the Jeep Cherokee this man drove them up to school in, looking like a big shot and posing. They were the ones bragging about the dope dealer man that they had. And many of these mothers and stuff, they were the same thing. They were the ones sitting in the projects, sitting there watching All My Children on the big screen, projection screen TV that their dope dealer son bought them. They were the ones, again, living a lavish lifestyle every week, ghetto fabulous, on all the money that this man bought them. But Spike gave all of that a pass. Instead, he focuses on a sex strike, basically reducing the black man down to some black brute who lives only for sex, and he's going to stop being violent just because women refuse to give him sex. And that really is a disingenuous thing to say about black men. It's really a slap in the face to black men when you really think about it. And it really is a slap in the face to black women because he's basically saying that the black woman is basically all she's good for is sex. And when you look at the whole Lysistrata thing, I know people say it's a satire, but it's a real insult to black people because it doesn't tell the story of what really is behind this violence in Chicago. And he was just too afraid, I believe, to tell that story because he's afraid thinking about box office. But the irony is, because he simped out, his box office still suffered. Now he may have made a good movie. That's all subject to people's opinion. But as I see it, he did not you know skim the surface. And the reason why he skimmed the surface, he did not dig deep, was because he was afraid of offending black women. And he was afraid of offending black women because he feared, you know, losing out on the box office. Now, a guy like me, I'm not afraid to lose. I'm not afraid, to put those views out here because I care about black women. I care about the black image. And I get threatened with people threatening me not to buy my books all the time, all because I express an opinion. But I'm not going to stop expressing that opinion because that opinion, I believe, will help people. It will help them grow, and whether you disagree with it, you understand something from a different perspective. I've had people again threaten me for years before writing blogs like why 70% of black women are single. I've had women threaten not to buy my books because I said, black women will be single for the rest of their lives. I've had black women threaten me because I said that, being a side piece is destructive behavior. But I still come out here and, present my points because, again, as part of my mission to create positive stories about the African American experience and, improve the quality of life of African Americans, I believe that sometimes you have to be constructively critical of people in order to help them grow. And this is something that was a tenet of what I learned at the Strive program, working there with AmeriCorps Vista 15 years ago. You know, we dealt with the fruits of your dope game. We dealt with the fruits, of that dysfunctional lifestyle. I saw these people firsthand. I saw your ex offenders who were the former dope dealers that, many of these black women enabled um, by supporting their dope dealing and criminal activity. I saw these guys come in here, in the Strive program looking for work because they lost all their money and they just came out of prison and now they were trying to rebuild their lives. And I saw these guys, I saw the pain that these guys went through and I saw all the things that they went through. I saw the single mothers, who had the babies for these dope boys. And when the dope boy went to prison, she was stuck with no skills and no education, and she had to come to the Strive program to try to rebuild her life. I saw that happen too. And I saw people who were homeless, and I saw people, the virtually unemployable firsthand. I saw them firsthand. And these are the people who suffered because of this violence. And some of them, they were a part of that whole violent lifestyle, and then they lost everything and they had to start all over again. So I know what I'm talking about when I talk about this issue, and that's why I say Spike he just skimmed the surface. He didn't really dig deep enough, and I believe again he was too afraid of offending this black woman to really speak on the subject the way he did and do the right thing. Now, in do the right thing, he really made a point about the dysfunction of the Afro American Negro. He made a core argument about all of this dysfunction because the dysfunction is right in front of you and do the right thing. But in this one, I feel he pulled his punches. And if he had hit hard, he would have had a movie that really had some impact. Because in order to really have some impact, regarding all this violence in places like Chicago, you really have to look at this Afro American female and how she enables and supports the dope dealers in her community, how she enables and supports the gangs in her community, how she enables, supports, and protects all of these people and makes excuses for all their dysfunctional behavior. Because if she's the teacher of culture and the head of household in all these neighborhoods, then this only goes on under her authority and her approval. Because again, in many of these projects or many of these Section 8 apartment buildings, who is the head of household? The head of household is the Afro American woman. Her name is at the top of the lease. And if she's going along with her son smoking pot, if she's going along with her son going back and forth with people and having beefs with people and arguments with people, then she is the one, responsible for this. If she is the one who raised this boy this way, and she was the one who said she's going to be the mother and the father, you know, she was the one responsible for all of this. But, Spike makes it look like, the black men are only violent they and sex is the only thing that they want, and that's just shallow. The argument, needs to be dug a little deeper, And if he had just dug a little deeper, he might have had an Oscar caliber quality film, and a film that would have, been as great as Do the Right Thing. Instead, he just skimmed the surface, tried to use Lysistrata in an artistic way, but, did not dig deep enough. You know, if I were to have written, your Chiraq, I would have done the research on Chicago, and I would have also made these points, about these black women and how they support these dope dealers and how they support these gangs, and how a lot of these guys, they're out here committing these crimes because they want to win the attention and approval of women. And I would also talk about, the history, of the so-called nice guy syndrome, which is what many men learned over the last 50 years because they have an overly close attachment to their mothers and they live to get the approval and to please women. This is what they have learned, was a culture that was taught to them. And that's one of the reasons why they're out here being violent, because some of these guys, they will kill another man over a woman. And they will kill another man because another man that's getting attention of a woman that they like. And these men are violent, again, because of the culture that they were taught by black women. But you can't tell, black women this without them getting upset. And when they hear from a guy like me, they get upset and then they threaten not to buy my books, thinking that they're punishing me, but then they're punishing themselves, because every black business that you don't support keeps money out of your community and prevents people like me from being able to help you. And that's the sad part about this, is the guy that you're trying to help, it's trying to help you, you're pretty much against. Meanwhile, people like your Steve Harveys and your Tyler Perrys, who continue to enable you in your dysfunction, you're for. And guys, sadly, like your Spike Lee, who are too afraid, to speak on a subject, you know, in the way that it needs to be spoken on. They're too afraid of losing black dollars that they don't speak on it constructively the way it needs to be spoke on. And when I look at this whole with the whole Chiraq movie, Spike Lee missed the mark, and he missed the opportunity to really constructively deconstruct this Afro American woman and her part in all this violence in Chicago. And just like she like just and gave her a pass, just like people gave black women a pass back in New York during the 1980s and 1990s during the crack epidemic. And because we keep giving this black woman a pass, what happens is the violence continues in inner city communities, and it is taught from generation to generation. And because the black woman is the first teacher of culture, all the males learn is how to be violent instead of learning how to problem solve, conflict resolve, and use logic and reason to work out a constructive solution without ever having to raise a single hand. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.